To really have any control over the layout of elements on a web page, you've got to understand the concepts of borders, backgrounds, and margins.
This video is brought to you by OppiePie's Academy.
Any block level element, which means an element that renders itself within a rectangle, that appears on the page has borders, backgrounds, and margins. Let's take a quick look at the rectangle and start there. So here I've created a web page. I've got a logical division or div that I've ID'd as example. Inside there's one paragraph of text. I just used some lorem ipsum text or some Latin text here to fill space. All right, so let's take a look at how this appears naturally in the browser. And as you expected, the text just runs straight across to the width of the browser, and it changes as the width of the browser changes, so it reflows. Now, we could make it a constant width by setting a width setting on the div. So let's go ahead and create within the head a style element, so we can put in some CSS. Let's use the selector example with the pound for ID, which is going to select this div example. And let's just simply give it a width of 500 pixels. So when we do that, now the width of the element is 500 pixels. Now we can see this visually if we use the developers tools that exist within Chrome or also other browsers as well. So for Chrome, I'm going to click right here, select More Tools and Developer Tools, just like that. And the developer tools will appear at the bottom of my screen. And if we go to here, the elements click box or selection, you see this illustration right here. I'm going to select the div we just created. And when I point at it, you can see the div itself outlined in blue in the top part of the browser. And we can see also using the illustration here that that section is 500 pixels wide by 126 pixels high. And you can see surrounding that is padding, border, and margin. Padding, border, and margin. And this essentially is the box model that's used to display any block level element within HTML. When I say block, notice here it says display block. Block level elements include divs, paragraph tags, and many, many others. They render it as a rectangle, and you can see that rectangle again in blue. So now, if we set the width lower, of course, we'd have more height because it bases the height on the amount of content that you have. So this is fine for right now. Now, I want you to notice that the actual blue box in the upper left-hand corner that surrounds this text is pulled away from the sides of the browser. And that's because the browser, by default, also has some margins. And if we take a look at the paragraph, see the orange? The orange represents the actual margin. You can see it here in the box. That's default with any paragraph. So any paragraph has a margin of 16 pixels on top and 16 pixels on the bottom. So the div is pushing us away a little bit, but it's the paragraph tags that are pushing us far away from the top of the browser. And also space between what elements below it is also illustrated in orange at the bottom. So you can kind of see an illustration of that right here. So these are all things we can control: padding, margin, and border. We also can control background, and that's kind of the fourth element here that's important. So let's start with padding on our div. So we have a width of 500. I'm going to set the padding here. I'm going to exaggerate it a little bit and set it to 10 pixels so you can see it easily visually. And then let's refresh. I've already saved the document. And let's again select the div. And notice now it shows 10 pixels of padding all the way around. And the div itself, you can see the padding outlined in green. So essentially we've added a 10 pixel pad all the way around the content. Now that doesn't affect the margins, see? Margins still exist, but we have that 10 pixel padding all the way around, so we can kind of loosen up the appearance of the actual div. Now, we can add a border. Now, a border has its own background color. So if we add a border, we could say border 10 pixels solid blue. And that's going to give us, of course, a visible 10 pixel solid blue border around the content. And there it is. And again, if we take a look here, now in our developers tools, you can see the border is in purple, the padding is in green, and you can also see the 10 pixels all the way around. Now, right now, we're setting this all the way around. I could, for example, simply say border, not just border, but let's say border top, like this, and I'll save. When we just do border top, let's look at our div. Notice there's 10 on top, but nothing on the left, right, left bottom, or right. So we can control these individually on each side as well as throughout the whole border. We're just going to control it throughout the whole border like this. All right, so there's our CSS, and here you can see exactly how it's rendering the div. So we've created some padding, we've created some border. Let's create some margin. Now, margin doesn't have a background color, it's just space, and it takes on the background color of whatever's behind it. So 10 pixels solid, oops, just 10 pixels because we can't give it color. There we go, and boom. So now we have a div with 10 on the margin, 10 on the border, 10 on the padding, and 500 by 158 for the actual content space. So you can see this all illustrated here. Now, one thing to keep in mind is this div is now 560 pixels wide. It's not just the 500 pixels wide, and that's confusing because you see here with 500 pixels for pound example. But look carefully. We also have to add in and consider the 10 pixels for margin, 10 for border, 10 for padding, and that's on each side. So we have 30 additional pixels on each side, giving us 60 plus 500 across for the actual content, giving us 560. So this is the box model. Now, this is also affected by background. Let's say we set here background color black and then color white to give the text a white color. So now that we have that, we can clearly see how background color affects here. So the background color is black. You can see if we, again, point right here, the background color is covering the content itself and the padding. The border has its own background color, the blue, and then the margin takes on the background color of the page itself or whatever's behind it. So that's white. So background color will only affect your padding area and your content area. So that's the box model, and understanding the box model is absolutely critical to being able to lay out pages the way you want. So this is definitely something you'll want to practice on your own until you get the concept of padding, border, margin, and background.